attention. Donald Trump has extended gag order. A surprising new development has just occurred in the political universe of the United States. Donald Trump has had his gag order extended, adding yet another layer of intrigue and speculation to his already tumultuous legacy. The extension of this gag order raises questions about what exactly is behind this measure. Is Trump facing new legal challenges? Or is this related to a broader political strategy to control his public presence? See everything now.
We have some breaking news. Judge Merchan has just sided with District Attorney Bragg in a ruling minutes ago. He expanded the gag order to include family members of the court and of the DA's office. Joining me now here at the table is Mary McCourt. She is the former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Justice Department. Also with us is former federal prosecutor and my buddy Glenn Kirshner. So Glenn, let me start with you. The DA has just come back with this ruling moments ago. Tell us, I know he's been scouring over the paper here. Tell us what you find in this. What should we need to know about what the judge has done?
So, Michael, I would say predictably, Judge Juan Merchan expanded the gag order to include family members of the judge, of the court staff, of the prosecutor's office. That's wonderful. Donald Trump is laboring under, a hat trick of shut up because there are 3 gag orders that have been in place over time. Judge Chutkan in the D.C. federal prosecution, Judge N. Goran in the New York civil fraud trial, and now Judge Merchan in the New York, I don't call it a hush money case. It's the 2016 election interference case that includes hush money payments that were then covered up with false business records. Has it done any good? Has it helped? You just said a minute ago, Donald Trump is putting his trial on trials. He's putting the criminal justice system to the test, and I think the system is failing. And the reason I say that is because you just read in part the first sentence from the motion that was filed by District Attorney Bragg, and it reads, defendant's dangerous, violent, and reprehensible rhetoric fundamentally threatens the integrity of these proceedings and is intended to intimidate witnesses and trial participants alike, including this court. To this old prosecutor, the only sentence that makes sense coming after that assertion is, therefore, the people are moving for pretrial detention. I'm not saying, listen, we have 4 criminal cases across 4 jurisdictions. There are different rules in every jurisdiction. But the fact that no judge and no prosecutor has stepped up to actually put a stop to Trump's dangerous rhetoric is a real problem.
And Mary, that's where Glenn put his finger on the pulse of what really irritates the heck out of me about all of this, because that sentence should follow the beginning of that. What's your take on the judge's expansion of this gag order? And how do you see other judges in other trials that Trump is before sort of assessing and dealing with this ruling?
I think the reason he expanded the gag order was less about his daughter and more about the message that Trump gets if he doesn't expand it, right? And more about the message that potential jurors get if he doesn't expand it. I think he is now very worried, and this is something that the DA raised in their papers, very worried that people are going to be extremely reluctant to serve as jurors, to have any witnesses are going to start to, become reluctant and maybe even be nervous about telling the truth on the stand because they feel like they're targeted, jurors, witnesses, trial participants, as well as their families. So to me, this was the judge saying, look, I've got to take this step here to send a message that the administration of justice will not be impinged by this conduct of Donald Trump. And he also says we're not in a David and Goliath situation here where the government is all powerful, because Trump himself, has a bully pulpit about as substantial as any.
Right. So let's pick up on that bully pulpit idea, because what Donald Trump's lawyers have argued is that he has the constitutional protection of free speech to say these things, to go after Merchan's daughter. How does that factor into this particular ruling? And is that an element that really prevents what Glenn says should happen next from happening.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that defendants have First Amendment rights, but those rights can be constrained when you are in a courtroom facing a trial in a criminal case and in a civil case. And the Supreme Court's been very clear about that. That is the obligation of the judge to, ensure that the defendant's behavior won't impact the administration of justice. And that could be through things like gag orders. It's through other restraints too, right? Because the point is you have to ensure that the defendant gets a fair trial, but that also means the public and the government get a fair trial as well. Right. It works both ways. And I think one of the things that Glenn has pointed out and that we've talked about, in other shows is that the judges, even when they've issued these gag orders, Judge Chutkan, Judge Merchan, Judge Engoron, well, that was a civil case, so it was different. But in the two criminal cases, they did not actually make those part of the conditions of release and required Mr. Trump to sign that he understands his conditions have now been expanded, and if he violates them, his release can be revoked. Instead, the remedies here are things like contempt of court for violating a court order. Now, that can result in time in jail, so it's not toothless, but I think for those of us, former prosecutors, it's unusual that these restrictions on speech were not just incorporated into the conditions of release.
So Glenn, Donald Trump will violate this gag order in 3, 2, 1. I mean, so when that happens, what happens? I mean, because Mary points out that you don't have, the defendant sort of signing, saying, okay, yeah, I acknowledge all this and this can happen to me. How do you see this playing out when that happens? Because it will.
Financial fines. And of course, who cares, right? There were some minor financial fines put in place by Judge Engoron in the civil case when he violated the gag order. I agree with Mary. I mean, in theory, you can be held in contempt. You can be confined for a brief period of time. But I go back to the fundamentals of the law. The law ordinarily says when you're a defendant on pretrial release, particularly in serious felony cases, and Donald Trump has 4 serious felony cases, if there's clear and convincing evidence that you pose a danger to the community or even one person in the community, you can be detained pending trial to neutralize that threat.
Can I just push on that point? You pose a danger to the community. People, when they hear that, they're thinking, this guy's a violent actor. He's someone who has harmed someone and is now being prosecuted. This is, in one sense, a situation where there's no physical harm. It's just Donald Trump running his mouth and saying crazy stuff that may or may not result with some idiot out there picking up, some action. How does that get squared by the court in a situation like this, where that language, at least intuitively to someone who's, listening to it from outside of the system, would hear, well, that would refer to someone who's raped somebody or shot somebody or done some physical harm to someone?
Yeah, so let me rely on what one of the appellate court judges said not 2 blocks from here during the gag order argument to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals when Donald Trump's lawyer made that point. Wait a minute, he's not responsible for what his supporters do after he posts something. And the judge said, wait a minute. There is a clear pattern here. Donald Trump posts the name of a witness and threats ensue. He knows this. He can't disavow it. It's what he intends by posting the names and photos. Not to mention, he was seen holding a baseball bat mid-swing at the prosecutor's head. So let's not say, well, these aren't crimes of violence. Donald Trump is all about violence. He's just using his words to accomplish his ends.
And so, Mary, what does that mean for average, Joe and Jane out there who is a potential juror in one of these trials? And they're seeing this, they're hearing this, and I really get what Glenn is saying about the judge sort of anticipating that and say, all right, everything's off limits now. Family, court clerks, all of that. Does that really give some solace to a potential jury pool?
Yeah.
or should I put something else in my coffee?
So, that's what Judge Merchan is trying to do. And the end of his order tonight warns the defendant. The defendant is hereby warned that any violation of this order will result in sanctions under, and he cites the law, which is the contempt sanctions. What he's trying to do is send in a message is, I do take this seriously. Don't be worried, Joe and Jane, potential jurors, because we will take action. But, I don't know if that's good enough, because we'll see what Donald Trump does. And, to your point in the opening about violence and to Glenn's point, I think what we are on right now, too, is just a slow or not so slow development of a long range incitement to violence, right? Because we have the photos of President Biden in the hogtied and kidnapped in the back of a truck. We have these incendiary, violent remarks about witnesses and prosecutors and judges. And this is all about inuring, getting his base ready to take action. And, unfortunately, our law, doesn't protect incitement to imminent violence, but that violence, he wants it to come. That's why he's doing it. And I think there's a high likelihood it will come. And imminence is really hard to judge with a man like Donald Trump.
All right. Ray McCord, Glenn Kirshner, thank you guys very, very much for being here at the moment it all pops. Really appreciate it.